Are you ready? Okay. All right, it's time. I will call to order the meeting of the Human Services Committee and the Human Services Board. This agenda was posted in the office of the county clerk on the 17th day of September 2021. Notice was sent to the West Bend Daily News, Express News, WIBD, WMBZ Radio, WTKM Radio, My Comments Now, Hartford Times Press, Kewaskum Statesman, and the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. And we do have a quorum. And if you would please rise now for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I will make one change to our consent agenda. There is no report from the Human Services Director. That was not included, so just ignore that item. But I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda, which includes items A, sub A, and sub B.
I
Oh, do you have a?
have a question
Oh, then on which item?
on this, on the Samaritan Director's
Okay,
report.
then we'll pull that one out. So we'll just, I'd entertain a motion then to just approve the minutes from June 23rd and August 25th of this year.
So moved.
Second? Pam, any discussion on that? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, that motion carries. All right, now Samaritan, what was your question, Lois?
So I had a question about how exactly that worked from going from 3 floors to 2 floors.
I think Tia's here.
Yeah, can you hear me? I'd be happy to share that. So our students were all leaving and we're about to hit a big staffing crisis. So what we did was the IDT team kind of met and determined who's appropriate to go to which floor. We didn't want to move the residents with dementia because that would just be too hard on them. So they kind of determined this group would be appropriate together. These residents would be appropriate here. We tried to look at different things like socialization, but also if possible that the room is set up similar. You know, if I have a weak left side, making sure that my bed and my wall is on the right side. So, and then once that was determined, we notified all the families or the residents if they were their own person. And then it was really an all hands on deck approach. We had a group of probably 20 of us who were assigned different rooms, and we worked with, if the families wanted to be involved, we invited them in, worked on physically moving the rooms. The unit secretaries made sure all the charts got moved over, and all of that, and maintenance, Kara and Scott's team were a huge help in that. So we can't thank you guys enough, but that's kind of how that went.
So how many rooms then remain empty?
So how many are on second floor, Matt? So second floor is completely empty. I don't know exactly how many are on that floor.
So there's 131 beds and you're down to 63.
65 today.
So 65 less than 131.
Okay. Okay, well, it sounds like a huge task and
That was, so I
And-
applaud the staff because it was a big project.
and I'm sure the families appreciate all of the work that you did in trying to make their your residents comfortable.
Any other questions?
No, I didn't have any.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing none, then I believe we will need a motion to approve the Samaritan Director.
We actually don't, we don't approve of reports.
All right. Thank you, Mary. Okay, then,
But we pulled it out of the consent agenda.
move it to discussion? Oh, to discussion. Okay, so we don't need to take any action on it. Okay, thank you. All right, then we move on to our discussion items with the first item being department budgets. And just so everybody has the correct understanding here, the Human Services Board is allowed to ask questions on that department's budget, but not on the others listed therein. So just so you know, Sarah, and that I know. All right, so we're going to start off with ADRC. Oh, and there's the man who knows it all.
Oh, yeah, well, we'll see about that. Thank you, everyone. My name is Aaron Dalton, the budget director, for those of you that we haven't met. I like to start these meetings with just sort of a quick review of our budget process. In April is when we get started on this whole thing. We start building assumptions, wage and benefit projections, big revenue and expenditure items. We start identifying those as early as August. Moving into June, that's when we start training people on budget development. We issue tax levy targets at that time. So tax levy target is essentially a tax levy amount that we issue to each department so that they can keep that in mind as they're building their budget. We sort of develop all of those targets as a whole, so that if and when the departments come in at budget target, we end up countywide hitting the levy that we know we want to hit. And so we issue those in June. In July, departments develop and enter their budgets. Moving into August, we have a series of meetings where departments then present those budgets to the county executive. At those meetings, the last couple of years, we've invited the standing committee chairs as well to those. So that really seems to help give them a chance ahead of time to ask questions, to hear different points as we're developing that budget, to kind of get in early and sort of hear those concerns ahead of time. So that gets us to now. So in September, standing committees are getting a preview essentially of the county executive's budget through a discussion item. The entire budget will be discussed at the public hearing on October 20th at the executive committee. And then the budget adoption is the 10th of November this year at the county board meeting. These meetings specifically, we've been going through the budgets themselves. This isn't a line item review or anything like that. We're hitting the significant items in each budget, the significant changes, the big policy items to note. Generally speaking, we keep moving through these budgets, but stop me along the way if you've got questions. We've certainly got the department heads here as well who can help answer a lot of those questions too. But I've been doing the bulk of the presenting on the budgets. That really we're sort of taking the opportunity to give a consistent message using consistent verbiage, things like that, and having the department heads fill in along the way certainly helps. Just a quick note on the overall budget so that you can put that into perspective as you're reviewing the individual department budgets here today. We started the budget process with a goal of holding the tax levy flat for each year of the biennium. We're pleased to say that we are actually able to reduce tax levy by $500,000 in each year of that biennium. So a full $1 million over the 2 years. Subsequent to that, we've got favorable property values that have come in. So 7.2% is higher than we've seen in recent years as well. So that increase in conjunction with the tax levy cut is going to also reduce our tax levy, our tax rate by a significant amount. So we're expecting to be under $2 in 2023 for the first time in a very long time. To put that into perspective, in 2018, I believe, I'm sorry, 2013, we were $2.88. So to be under $2 is significant. So with that, I'll move into the department budgets. In your packet, you'll see what we're calling a functional area summary. So that just takes all of the individual departments and sort of packages them up in just some summary financial tables, some summary FTE tables. We talk a little bit about the changes that are in there, but really the meat of it is in the department budgets. So I didn't plan on speaking a whole lot on the functional area summaries. I just wanted to point those out as an additional supplementary piece of information that we provide. So moving into the ADRC budget. First off, I wanted to mention that this budget is showing a minimal use of pandemic related funds. So rather than building in program enhancements and expansions rather into the operating budget, we're keeping the service base sort of status quo here. We'll certainly be receiving some pandemic related dollars, but we're going to be having a conversation and be deliberate as how we look to utilize those. So we're doing this in a way to provide the services as intended, but we don't want to permanently expand programs and services in a way that is going to put us in a tough spot later on down the road when the federal funding dries up and now we've got this enhanced service or program that we've got to now find a way to fund. So we're trying to be deliberate with how we use these federal dollars. That same concept applies countywide with all the different pots of money that are kind of flowing in this time, around this time. So that's generally the approach. I wanted to point that out here. The second piece of information I did want to point out is that we've discovered a typo in the 2021 estimated column here. It's related to, we're using a new system this year. We've experienced some quirky things with the estimated column, but as you're going along with the tax levy impact along the bottom, this department typically is between $1 and it's around $200,000 to $300,000 of tax levy, and in 2021 we're showing 1.5 million. That's a typo. I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
And it's already been fixed. I just didn't get an updated copy in the packet in time. So, yeah, right.
Is this, can I just ask? Are you referring to the line in expenses? It's called interdepartmental charges, the $1.5 million?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And do you know what that number should really be? It looks to me like it's an in and out from someplace.
Yes, it should be closer to 100, either 100, I can't remember right now. It's either 150,000 or 125,000.
Okay.
And so
It was a little bit alarming when I first saw it.
yeah, same here. So
I was wondering, what were you doing with all that money?
right. So I just wanted to point that out. But so again, moving through these financial tables, we're not going to hit every one. But to start off with, I wanted to talk about congregate meals and home delivered meals sort of together. Those are the two financial charts in the middle. We are showing a shift of tax levy into the congregate meal plan program. It's not the first time we've had levy in here. It's just the number of years we've shown on this table only shows a couple of years. And so there's tax levy in here in 22. We didn't have it in there in 21, but typically we do. And so there's normally a share of tax levy in both of those programs. And so you'll sort of see that kind of fluctuate around throughout the years of the biennium. But another piece that I wanted to talk about is that there is an increase being budgeted moving into 2023. This is due to some increased costs for providing meals. The Samaritan is no longer handling our meals program and no longer preparing the meals. And so we're not obviously getting as good a deal as before. and so we had to budget for a new contract moving into this next biennium. And so these cost increases sort of represent that phenomenon. Oh, yes, please.
Obviously, with the pandemic, the congregate meal sites have had closed. So you're seeing, as Aaron was speaking to, that there's basically nothing in there. We did reopen all of our congregate sites incrementally, but they are all opened at this time, but we're seeing very low numbers. So another reason for that home delivered looking so much larger is because that is the bulk of the service that we are providing. And we also are, due to the pandemic status, able to provide carry-out meals as an exception to the normal state regulations. They're allowing that. That also gets documented as a home delivered meal. So this 21 and then 22 and 23 does look a little bit different than it normally does because of that. So just wanted to provide that clarification. Yes.
So is there revenue to match that from the CARES Act? Because
There was money from the CARES Act. That money has all been expended. We are anticipating, if you look in the summary, money from the ARPA funding, but that is not budget in here because we do not have the actual contract for those dollars yet.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Tammy. Those were my notes on that page. I wanted to move into the next page of the budget here. In the ADRC Aging and Disability Resources section specifically, that's that middle financial table. Obviously, that's where as we noted before, that's where the typo is. But in that same line, if you look from budget to budget, you also see about a $79,000 to $80,000 increase there as well. That represents an increase related to the county's indirect cost plan. So when we've got grant funded departments like this, finance does a calculation each year of sort of the central services that get provided of finance, different things like that. And when we can, we charge those services out to these grant funded departments. The idea being, rather than levy for that entire amount for sort of central administration costs, we try to recoup as much of that as we can through those grants. So I wanted to point that out, that there was the way that plan is calculated, there was sort of a shift there. This is not a typical increase, but there's kind of a shift where there's essentially there are winners and losers in all of this, but really I just wanted to point that out because it looks like a significant increase. It's not, there's not tax levy impact with those things, but I just wanted to point it out. The last piece I wanted to talk about was that there is an increase in budgeted for a aging services tech position. That's an existing position. We're just increasing the budget from a 0.45, almost a half in FTE or full-time equivalent, moving that up to a 0.7. That's being funded from a contracted nurse that's no longer renewing that contract. So just looking to increase FTE to provide a consistent level of service with that transition. Excuse me. Tammy, did you have anything else to add on the budget? Otherwise, those were my notes on ADRC. Oh, I'm sorry, there is a question as well.
Go ahead, Pam.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm sorry, going back to the meals.
You said Samaritan no longer is preparing the meals as a result of an increased cost. I swear you've shared this in the past, the rationale why, but could you refresh our memories on the rationale of why on this change? And then are you meeting the goals, your expectations on that change?
Yeah, so by state contract, we have to go out for a bid for the meal program. Every 3 years. With a 4th year, you can request an extension. So they pretty much kind of blanket allowed that for ADRCs that were at that 3rd year area. And so we did go out for a bid, and we were able to contract with a company that provides the meals for Waukesha County and also for Ozaukee County. And I'm not sure if I should speak to this, but I believe because of the future of Samaritan and the discussions going on with that, that they chose not to provide the meal service ongoing.
Do I do this process? Okay, thanks. So I think when Tammy was putting together the bid for the meals, we were in full discussion at that point about merging with Cedar. And that was not a program that Cedar was interested in doing. Also, when we're still in a state of unknown, and we need to make sure that the home delivered meals program is solid and has a contractor that's going to be providing service for a long period of time, or at least for the 3 years. And I also, if we do build a new facility, it will be a reduced cost for us if we don't have to have a larger kitchen to meet the needs of both the residents' meals as well as the home delivered meals.
Any other questions on this budget? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, Pam.
No, I'm not.
You say you're decreasing the tax levy. I mean, that sounds beautiful and wonderful, but is there anything we're not meeting? Are we concerned of any gaps or?
I think when Aaron was speaking about decreasing the tax levy in 2021, we're anticipating coming in under our targeted tax levy because of all of the pandemic funds that we had initially. So we had CARES funding, COVID funding, all sorts of funding. So we were able to come in under the targeted tax levy. The following 2 years, we are due to come in right at the targeted tax levy amount. So I do not have any concerns at this time about services that are not being provided. We are meeting all the contractual requirements and more, and doing a really good job at it. You're welcome.
Okay. I guess we can keep
Thank you.
going.
So moving on, we're now to the joint health budget. So as you all know, this is mostly a contract with Ozaukee County where we pay 60% of the cost. They pay 40% of the cost of the department. In here, we also have some interdepartmental charges for it's rent for the PAC for the part of that operation that's still housed on the county's facility. I know that, you know, with it being one line contracted services, there's not a lot there to work from. And so in the packet, I included the budget book pages from Ozaukee County, which sort of summarize some of their costs and revenues. And really, there's not a lot of change in this budget at all. They're not increasing FTE. They've got moderate increases for their normal personnel costs. There's not a lot of other cost increases there. And really the bottom line is they're using ARPA funds to pay for those increases as well. And so our cost is going to be the same for 2022 as it was for this year, 2021. We obviously, they do a 1-year budget, we do a 2-year budget. And so we had to factor something in for 2023. We built in some moderate increases for 2023. And so I just wanted to point that out as I tried to include. I did sit in on the Board of Health meeting last week, sort of heard some of the commentary and potentially some of the concerns about not having a lot to work from with the budget. So I tried to include as much as I could, as much as I could get from Ozaukee County so that we could make sure you had something to at least review and work from.
Any questions on this one? Okay, and then we can move on to the Human Services Department.
All right, thank you.
And Sarah, just as a reminder, if you have any questions, you can ask them on this one.
Good, because I wouldn't have answered any questions on any other budgets, so keep that in mind. The admin section, starting with Human Services, going from the top down, there are administrative costs that go in here, and then they get allocated out to the other divisions. Again, that's the same concept as the indirect costs that I referenced earlier. It sort of just helps recoup some administrative costs against the various intergovernmental funding sources that are in here. So similar also to the ADRC, the indirect cost plan impacted this budget to the tune of about $260,000 as well. And so I wanted to point that out because when you go through each individual, so we're talking admin now, but the remainder of the sections, the interdepartmental line for each of those sections potentially is showing an increase that may catch your eye. I just wanted to point out that this is typically due to that that indirect cost plan that is built into these budgets. So not a lot to talk about on admin. Moving into behavioral health, there's a lot of moving parts in this one. Really the biggest one is there's a $2.4 million reduction in both expenditures and revenues. That's to reflect the fact that the state's taken over as the payer for waiver services through the CLTS, CLTS being Children's Long-Term Support, that program. So prior to this, we made the payments and we got money back in return. The net change of this is $0. But again, $2.4 million is a lot to see come out of these budgets. So I wanted to make sure I point that out as something that would and should catch your eye. On a related note, we are allowed to essentially budget a 7% administrative fee for our coordination and our case management of the youth treatment services. We're budgeting that this year for the first time. So that increases revenues by about $73,000 with that change. Next, in behavioral health, that division is increasing staffing for a psychiatric social worker to implement family-centered therapy in the youth justice and child welfare. This position is going to be it's planned to be fully paid for by CCS, or Comprehensive Community Services revenues. And the idea is that it's going to hopefully replace or reduce the number of out-of-home placements, which could potentially be another cost savings down the road. Next, the behavioral health is budgeting a reduction in costs for guardianship fees for adults at risk. The payer source for this has been shifted to family care. So we're expected to see about a $90,000 reduction in cost here as well. Another change in behavioral health, there's an increase to the contract with St. A's for youth comprehensive community services. That increases about $135,000. And again, there's revenue to match that from the CCS. And so it's, again, net impact of 0, but another change to note in this budget. The next piece, there is some increased costs being budgeted for Institute of Mental Disease. There's a $150,000 increase. Essentially, that helps better align that expenditure line with historical actuals. And so it's really just a move in the right direction. And we're pleased to see that change was made so that we're budgeting close to actuals. The TAB program is in this budget with anticipated revenue to match grant revenue. The budget's planning to do both OWI and both the OWI and the opiate related programming. It's applying for both of the grants. If we don't get the grant or both, the opiate program is going to take precedent. That's something I wanted to make sure we pointed out as something that came up at the budget meetings. And so both are in here. If somehow we don't get the funding, the opiate takes precedent. Okay. And then last on the behavioral health division, we're budgeting an increased revenue for WMCR, which is the Wisconsin Medicaid cost reporting. It's essentially to get us where we think the dust will settle on this piece. Julie, could you kind of explain what WMCR is?
Sure. So we run all of our programs that we're running through Medicaid, our comprehensive community services, our outpatient, our case management. WMCR is essentially allocated to make you whole. Does it really? Probably not, but get you a little bit closer. So it's a very time-intensive, complicated Medicaid cost report where we have to put in all of our billable time as well as our unbillable time, and it also reflects staffing time. So like part of my time, right, that goes to managing these programs, but that we can't bill for. And at the end of the year, we get sort of a lump sum of money to get us closer to making us whole. It's complicated because, so as an example, we just finalized our 2020 WMCR and we'll be expecting our payment in November, December. And so whenever we're budgeting it, so when we budgeted it for 2021, we're really budgeting what we think we might get for 2020. And it's really anybody's best guess. And we don't even know what the dollar amount will be that we're going to get in November or December. We'll know in a couple of weeks. And so when we budget it, we're budgeting it based on, what we received the prior year. And so as you've seen over the last several years, that allocation has increased. When I started, we actually weren't filing the report. And so Aaron, if you recall, for those of you who were here, Aaron spent some sleepless nights getting us caught up for 2 years. But because we weren't tracking things accordingly, because you have to be able to have an audit trail, we actually didn't receive any money. I think we had to pay back $100,000 or something. So every year we've been getting our systems and processes tightened up, and we've been seeing an increase of that allocated revenue every year. And so that's why we've always sort of been behind in allocating it. But I will tell you, we're probably at full allocation at this point. So there's no more wiggle room. I don't know, Aaron, did you get a bonus?
Just happy to help. I mean,
he got pride. I think he got a promotion. So
That's true. That's true. Okay, thanks, Julie. So moving into the children and families section, there's not nearly not a lot going on in the children and families section. There's certainly some big numbers in there, but a couple of the high points on the revenue side, we're budgeting some increases in program revenue. It's related to billing for direct care. It's about a $50,000 increase. On the expenditure side, this is largely what we refer to as a cost to continue budget. Really, it's just general personnel costs and general contract type cost increases. There were some personnel costs that were increased slightly over the county average. But really this is because, you've got a group of employees who choose family insurance instead of single insurance that can swing a budget by tens of thousands of dollars. And really that's what was happening here. Otherwise, not a lot of stuff to talk about in this one. Moving down into economic support then. The big story here is that we're no longer running the Wisconsin Home Energy Assistance Program. The state does not mandate that counties themselves run it. Essentially the state will contract out with a local nonprofit next time around to provide those services. Related to this, we're reducing 2 positions, eliminating 2 positions. That has happened already. That was done through attrition in one case, and in another case, that person was simply able to slot into a vacant position that we already had open, and so nobody was turned or terminated or anything like that as related to this change. But from a budget side, there is a cost reduction. Because it's in economic support, there's a related revenue reduction as well. So we get, essentially there's a formula and we get a portion of our costs back in revenue. And so it's not a 1-for-1 cost reduction, but it is a reduction of about $45,000. So you see some savings there as well. Are there any questions on the human services budget? The next section is family care, and really that's the same number every year, and there's not a lot to talk about. So any questions on the human services budget? Otherwise, Julie, please feel free to add anything that I may have missed in here too.
I don't see any hands raised. Nobody's
All right.
questioning. Do we need to look at the capital outlay or their user fees at all?
There weren't significant changes. Capital outlay is a request that they've made in the last several budgets, I believe. Really, it's just sort of replacing vehicles in the fleet of vehicles. So not a lot to talk about there.
And the user fees, I think this is the first time in all the years that I've looked at this where you actually are increasing different ones, but I know a lot of them need statutory approval or covered by the statute, so.
Yeah, I think, so Sandy Hofert, our assistant director, really manages working with the divisions and determining what is an appropriate fee. We don't always collect that whole fee, and we also want to look at burden to families, especially low-income families. But we want to, to have a fee that is reasonable for the services that we're providing. Some of the specifically in children and families, and some of the revenues that you've seen an increase has been twofold. One, we have some great staff who are really focused on collecting those fees and working with families to at least pay their fair share. And then also, slightly increasing those every year. And so I know every year she kind of goes back and forth with, okay, I think this is the year we could do $5 more. And so because we were doing a biennium, I think they said, okay, we'll do a little bit more. Some of it is like, we also have sort of a cost of living increase for services as well. So.
Okay. Any questions on any of those materials? Okay, then I guess we can go on to Samaritan.
All right, thank you. The Samaritan budget is several pages long. There's a lot of different, very small groupings of things in here, and one thing we're going to look to work on moving into future budgets is to condense this a little bit to make it more meaningful. That applies to a lot of budgets in the county, but this one in particular, there's a lot of different pieces in here, and some of it's not as meaningful as I think it could be. But I say that to get to my larger point, which is I don't plan on hitting I don't plan on hitting these financial tables specifically. I want to talk more globally about this budget. And you'll certainly hear a little bit more about the Samaritan and about the future a little bit later in the presentation. But the Samaritan is an enterprise fund, meaning there's no tax levy in this budget. Really, the big story here is that we're budgeting a reduction in the average daily census in the skilled nursing from 105 down to 75. Given the staffing issues that are being experienced nationwide, basically this is the level that the department can responsibly provide. The leadership at the Samaritan, Matt and Marty Halverson, who's on the budget team as well, they spent a lot of time and did some really good work in building out a model for establishing a needs-based budget for labor. This model is going to help whatever transition and size change that might happen to this department. And so kudos to them for doing really good work to build out a model that helps us plan for the future. So obviously with the reduced census comes reduced FTE. So you'll notice we're budgeting nearly 20 full-time equivalent positions fewer than we had in 2021. Some of this reduction is also related to that change for needs-based scheduling. What that means is before we had FTE on the books for casual staff, meaning we're showing FTE for casuals, but in a lot of cases, not necessarily using them or incurring costs for them. So we're kind of showing an inflated position count when really that's not necessarily reality. Moving through the budget, some of the other expenditures were adjusted to also reflect that reduced census, some of the volume-based costs and some of the contract-based costs for the level of service. Some of that was also adjusted. On the revenue side, there is some good news. The state budget had a 12% increase built in for 2022, and then another 12% increase built in for 2023 for the Medicaid rates. Medicaid being one of the worst rates in the payer mix. This is welcome news because any increase certainly helps. So again, these are the high points of this budget. You'll certainly hear more about the Samaritan and the financial future later in the meeting, but I wanted to share these sort of high points about the Samaritan budget. Are there questions about this one?
You're doing a really good job, Aaron.
Oh, great, thank you. The last one is vets. So we go from two huge budgets down to a very small budget. There's not a lot to report in this one. One person changed from family insurance to another, I think, single insurance. So that's a big cost swing for a small department like that. So that resulted in a reduced levy need moving into 2022. So that's helpful. The other piece to mention is, I like to point this one out because there's a small increase to the minimal revenue that they do get in this department. The state budget increased the grant that the county receives by a whopping $1,300. But it's the first increase in many years, and so any little increase is welcome. But just wanted to point that one out. So that's all I had on vets. That's all I had on all the budgets.
Okay.
So if there aren't any
Good.
questions, I think that's all.
No, I don't, any questions from anyone? Terrific.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. All right, before we go to item B, I'm going to, if no one has any objection, I want to skip down to one of our action items, which is 6C, the resolution on the TDS easement on Samaritan grounds. Scott had asked me to move him up. He has an important phone call to get to, so you have the floor, Scott.
Thank you. Yes, important and maybe expensive too. It's my daughter's financial aid phone call this for tonight. So I do appreciate you moving this up and thank you very much. So you have before you in your agenda packet, we were contacted by TDS Telecom for an easement for fiber optic line that's running through the city of West Bend. This is not a fiber optic line that runs from home to home, but actually like location to location. So you can imagine city of West Bend to Port Washington, stuff like that, right? So it's a middle mile easement, a middle mile fiber optic line versus that last mile fiber optic line. What they did was they run the line through the city of West Bend, and they've been trying to get a hold of, and they contacted many residents and businesses along 33 to see if they can have this easement on their property. You can imagine a lot of the homes and businesses aren't real wanting a hut, if you saw the picture of it, in their front yard or in their business. So they reached out to us to see if we would be amenable to potentially have this on our property. And we found an area on our property I think is just about perfect for this easement. Inside there, you'll have a picture in your packet on page 52, it looks like, of the location of the easement or potential easement anyway. Excuse me, page 51. What we're looking for is the south side of Highway 33, just west of the entrance to the fields and the youth treatment center. If you look on the drawing, there's an orange storm sewer to the west or left of it. There is the sidewalk to the north, which is our property line. There's a Energies easement to the south of that with a ditch. To the east, there's a large utility transformer for Energies. So you kind of look at that area, there's some trees in there. The hut's gonna be built into the ground, so about 4 foot down. Okay. And so only about 4 feet of it will actually be sticking up, and they'll put vegetation around it. If you happen to drive by, there's some pink stakes out there locating the center of the easement or the edges of the easement, as well as you'll see just west of there. You might not even notice the other transformer because they do have some arborvitaes around it and stuff. So we'll be looking at doing some landscaping. So I think it's a good opportunity for the county to put this there. It does tie in with our broadband a little bit, making sure that they have, connectivity for that fiber optic line that runs out there. They did just recently reduce the easement size, so I did update the agenda packet report from instead of 30 feet by 30 feet to go to 17.5 feet by 30 feet to avoid the Energies easement. This easement would run with the land. So if something did happen to the land and we decide to sell it or something, that easement will go with the land. So it'd be in perpetuity. We would have the opportunity, as we do with any of the easements, which you see on the drawing, there's numerous easements on our land on the south side of the roadway. There's a sewer and water runs through the south side of the Samaritan. There's a underground power line to the Samaritan. There's a phone line that runs through the land. So there's a lot of easements out there already, but this one's kind of tucked away in the corner. Again, with the building setback that's there from the property line. If you're familiar, when you want to do a building, you got to do a building setback. So it's within that setback area. So it's really an area of the land that we don't have a whole lot of use for. So I think it's a great location for that. Like I said, down the hill and out in the hut. They also, because they are in a desperate situation of finding lands, willing to pay us for the easement. A lot of the other easements I've done in the county, I've probably done 6 to 12 in the county through the years, in the last 20 years. And usually it's Energies and utilities where we don't actually get payment from them. We provide those easements to them at their cost because they would pass them on to their clients. This one, because of the hut, they're looking at actually providing us and looking at funding us for about $35,000 for that. And certainly County Executive Schulman is here if you'd like to explain how we'd like to potentially utilize those funds that we're getting for that easement.
Sure, thank you, Scott. So this is one-time money, of course. The dollars coming in
one of the issues that was brought up at executive probably 6 months ago or so. It was right around the same time that the ribbon cutting happened at the 9/11 memorial. And there was some discussion about what they needed to close out that project. In subsequent discussions with their new executive director, as well as members of their board, they're kind of moving on to a new phase where they'd like to be more advocacy related to the 9/11 and history teaching and impacting the community. And so one of the ideas that was brought forward was actually creating an endowment fund for scholarships for law enforcement, military, EMTs, and firefighters. And so the proposal would be kind of the tag off of what the executive committee had been working on, but now direct it to them as a nonprofit, but in the form of an endowment that would be permanent, that could go to a scholarship fund of that variety. If we would do that, what I would pledge to do on an annual basis, I have about $11,000 a year that I defer from salary that's been granted to the county executive. I would match it with these dollars to create approximately $66,000 to go into that endowment. And then I would challenge the fire chiefs and the police chiefs to match that to make it $100,000 total. So we'd be able to have typically in an endowment through the West Bend Community Foundation, as an example, you're talking about approximately 4% interest per year. So you're talking approximately $4,000 in scholarships that could go to each one of those areas: law enforcement, EMTs, firefighter, and military, whether that's their children or somebody who wants to get into one of those professions in our community. Whatever we decide, that hasn't been worked out yet, but that was kind of the concept. Use one-time money to go to a one-time source that then can perpetually give back. So that's the thought.
I think that's a great use of money that we really didn't expect. So really help our youth in the county. Any questions on this item? Okay, then I would entertain a motion to approve an easement to TDS Telecom. Is there a second? Pam, all right. Any questions or comments on this? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, and that motion carries. Thank you, Scott. Good luck on your phone call. All right, so now we're going back to our discussion items, which is 5B, and that is the future of Samaritan. And Matt, you're gonna start us off with that item.
So Matt
Oh,
asked me
Josh
to
is gonna
start
start
off,
us
if
off.
that's all
Okay.
right, Madam Chairwoman. I'd like to just reorient the discussion. It's been a while since we've talked about this. But we're here in September because we wanted to stay on track as best as possible. And I think you heard a little bit about why in the budget discussion. Now you'll hear a lot more about why in this conversation. So I'll draw you back to kind of the why are we here first. And remember, it was three really key things that brought us to this table of discussion. First was the age of the building, built back in 1964. Second was Medicaid reimbursement, Title 19, Title 18, Title 19 predominantly being what funds skilled nursing facility operation. And then third was staffing. Two of those three have gotten worse, not better. And one of them, while has gotten better, it's modestly better. Much better from a state budget perspective, but modestly better relative to what is really needed to operate. So the staffing issues, Aaron started to allude to, and certainly Taya and Julie and Matt can speak to it probably ad nauseum. But that challenge is getting significantly worse. And if you look at this from a demographic perspective over the next several decades, it's going to get even worse. So I'm very concerned about that issue. It's a large part of why we're here in front of you today. Behind the scenes, and Matt can touch on this, we're looking now at almost emergency action for how to keep people, CNAs and LPNs in particular. But really across the board, this is a problem. So, and I know it's not just us, it's throughout the industry, and not just nursing homes, but healthcare in general. So there's lots of issues related to that, but that was one of our 3 issues. And again, it's getting worse, not better. Second, the building itself certainly is not getting any newer, but on top of that, facility staffing is also a problem for all of the exact same reasons and more. And so wanting to keep this conversation on track, what I'm seeing from an executive perspective, kind of that 60,000 feet, is we really have kind of 2 tracks with where there's multiple options down those 2 tracks. One track is kind of a let's solve it right now kind of track, where either you solving now means something in the next 6 to 18 months, but where either you kick it to a referendum and let the community make a decision. If you contemplate those 3 things that I just talked about, I mean, these are massive generational issues. This isn't like Washington County can solve any one of those things. Medicaid, maybe the largest of which, this is really a federal problem that the county is trying to address. But certainly referendum is and always has been an option. And I think the people of Washington County being empowered to make the decision is part of that. But the other track is the county board certainly has the authority and the ability to make this decision. We had a very long and difficult discussion about a week and a half ago about exactly where we were going with this discussion because of all the things that I've just talked about and how urgent staffing in particular is. It's certainly a possibility that the board take this on their own and make this decision. But if we do that, I'm not suggesting we do that. And the reason I'm not is because if we do that, it's really a form of kicking the can down the road. And what I mean by that is if you make that decision, essentially what you're doing is this second track. Okay, so let's say we decide, we collectively, the county board, and I sign whatever resolutions and ordinances need to be signed. But if we sign those and we do that, essentially what you're doing is you're saying we're going to build a $25 to $30 million facility or series of facilities. And 5 years from now, we're going to be in basically the same situation we're in now, except now we got a fancy new building or series of buildings. Staffing crisis is not going to get better. It's probably going to get worse. And Medicaid is probably not going to get better. It's probably going to get worse. That's going to force us at that point, whether it's 5 or 7 or 10 years from now, it's going to force us really back to the same spot. And that is a decision point where really you have one of 3 choices. You can get out of the business. Now, 7 years from now, or whatever it is, you'll have more information. Hopefully we'll have a better idea of how the federal government's going to solve this, because baby boomers aren't getting any younger and that demographic isn't getting any smaller. Second, so you could potentially get out of the business. You could look at going to referendum at that time, because if nothing substantially changes with Medicaid, you're probably going to need property tax money to subsidize this operation. Almost every other county subsidizes. And quite honestly, well, let me come back to that. Almost every other county subsidizes, which I think is a crime in and of itself. But then lastly, you could at that time look at getting into other areas of long-term care. We've avoided that. Most other counties have not avoided it. They've taken it head on. So there was a time when we took it head on. We added the CBRF, the RCAC. That happened over time. That was a strategic decision to essentially, not completely, but essentially subsidize the skilled nursing facility operation. So basically it's just making the pain wait longer to hit you right in the face. If we stay true to ourselves, now let me get back to the second one. If we stay true to ourselves, and I think the values of Washington County, then the space in which we operate is Title 19. Chapter 55's the type of care that basically nobody else wants to do. Other counties aren't doing that. Other counties, and they are choosing to stay in the business, but they are largely going into the space that the private and nonprofit sectors are in. Now, we could have a long philosophical and ideological argument about why the private sector and the nonprofit sector aren't doing that here. I don't think it's worth our time. But to make a long story short, if we're going to stay true to ourselves and our conservative values, and we stay in the Title 19 space, either you make the decision to go into the competitive environment of independent living and maybe more RCAC, or you go down the property tax subsidy path. Or you say, we're not going to compete at all and we're out, but then just know you're kind of leaving a whole population unserved. Now, to make this all a hell of a lot more complicated, all of the data says, as of today, the private sector and the nonprofit sector can handle this population. Washington County doesn't need to be in this business. But they're not doing that, which tells you that the federal government is screwed up. At least, well, it tells me that. Maybe it doesn't tell you that. It tells me that this isn't a free market decision. Okay, we're not making a purist ideological, let the free market do what the free market's going to do, because the federal government has already monkeyed with what the free market is. So we're really making a how do we fix the federal government screw up decision, and that's a lot more difficult. I say all of that because Washington County's been in this business really basically since we started 150 some years ago, but it doesn't make the decision any easier. So what I'm asking, and kind of what Matt will start to go down the path of presenting to you, is really, do we send this decision to voters today, and we begin this dialogue about subsidizing with property taxpayer dollars, which may or may not happen in the next few years, or do we simply build something new and kick that decision for taxpayers down the road? I think that's really what you're deciding, not just today, but in the next couple of months. And it's what Matt will start sketching out along with Julie and Tay and the rest of the team. There's nothing simple about this decision from my vantage point. It's extremely difficult from a personal perspective, from a political perspective. I don't think there's really a wrong answer, to be quite honest. It's which answer is the best one for Washington County. I will say, however, because of the time and space that we're in now, there's money coming from every direction. I don't think people fully understand what's happening right now, economically, demographically, in the workforce. I think it's too much information for people to take in and to absorb right now. There's just too many things happening. So I think asking people a strict up or down vote, we're in or we're out, I honestly think we're putting too much on people. I don't think we're in a space right now where people can accept that much information. And I'm not saying that voters aren't capable of making the decision. They certainly are. I think there's just too many moving parts and pieces for us to nail down, this is exactly what's going to happen if we make this decision. I don't think we have a damn clue. I don't think Whitfleet's got a damn clue. I don't think America's got a damn clue. So I think at this juncture, it makes all the sense in the world to make a decision knowing full well, either in April, you're going to referendum, or in April of some future year, you're going to referendum. But that's coming one way or another. Do you want to spend $25 to $30 million without the referendum, or don't you? So that's kind of the framing of the discussions we've had in the last 6 to 8 weeks. Post Cedar Campus making the decision that they made. Matt's done a whole heck of a lot of work in starting to architect what it might look like if we are to stay in the business. There's a lot of unanswered questions that have to come yet, and we contemplated kicking this to October or November, but the truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter if we kick this to December or January. We're not going to have enough new information to give you really anything other than it's going to be 25 or 30 million. This is what it might look like. And 5 or 7 years from now, we're still going to have this question lingering out there. So I wanted to make sure that you had kind of that maybe depressing but realistic look at the decision that you're going to have to make, because it really isn't as simple as should we or shouldn't we take care of this population. It's way, way more complicated than that. And it has little or nothing to do with what Washington County wants. This is a regional wide, this is a statewide, this is a nationwide, and quite honestly, a global issue that we're being forced to try to make a decision in this whole big mess. So Matt, do you want to talk about all the fun stuff?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I agree with Josh. I mean, everything he's saying, he's absolutely correct. First of all, I've got to commend Taya and her team because they are struggling. The nation is struggling for direct care workers, for workers, number one. Then you add on top of it, you know what? There are a myriad of jobs available out there, and we might close. In April, we're going to vote. So we're seeing people leave. So we're going to have to address this crisis, whether or not we hold on until we're able to find placement for 63 residents, or we wait for a vote in April, or whatever, fill in the blanks. So that's the first major problem. And we're wrestling with that. And Julie's done outstanding working with Taya. She gets thrown into this whole thing, and she's working many hours on this. So that's one piece. There's so many different pieces to this. And Josh hit a lot of them that are good conversations as to where do we go? What's the right answer? Is there an answer? And what I see is, I started here in 2013. We had 131 beds licensed, and we ran somewhere between 128 and 131. This year, 21, they budgeted for 105. And you see with COVID and all, we're struggling. We're at 63. And once again, my understanding is we're closed down again. So today we close. We closed 3 times now for COVID. So where that means no admissions. So as you noticed, in 22 and 23, we're budgeting for 75. If we build, I'm proposing 48. And you say, wait a minute, Matt, with the demographics, we're talking hundreds of people. And that's true. We don't know what the feds are going to do. We don't know what kind of model. Are we going to spend more money at home, keeping our elderly at home or with family like the Asian countries do? What is going to be the answer? We really don't know. One of the problems we have to compound all of this is we have a building that is literally falling apart. So it's getting to the point that we have to put something in. And a week and a half ago, we talked seriously about, do we dump $10 million and shore it up? And that's throwing good money into a bad situation. And so do I spend 20 or 25 million and build new At least you have that and it's a safe environment. And why so few 48 and for skilled and 32 for assisted living? Because we can't staff it. We don't have people willing to. And finally, and it's very perplexing why the state of Wisconsin in years have been the very last, the lowest Title 19 payer in the United States. Recent 3 or 4 years, they've been the lowest the fourth one from the bottom in reimbursement. It's horrible. It's a sin that how low we're reimbursing people. And it used to be, and even if it was today, if we closed the doors today, what would happen to our residents? They probably, very few would be placed in Washington County. They would go in other counties. I would venture to say in 2 years from today, every county will have the same dilemma. And there'll be no such animal as we're closed, so go to another county. That no one will find them. That you won't find empty beds is the problem. You'll find the private sector taking care of those with insurance for long-term care, and Medicare, of course, they'll take, but you won't find, and you'll find some, very few, private pay, but that's about it. And so we are in a crisis point, and the question is, do we do something to help, or do we, which won't be fully adequate, no matter what our solution is, or do we put pressure on the feds and the state? They've got to get their heads out of the sand and start thinking about this dilemma. In today, our baby boomers, the oldest is 75. In 7 years, they'll be 82. In 82, that's usually the starting point. Now you get people in their 60s in nursing homes, but 82 starts becoming the more norm that you're going into a nursing home. That's when the baby boomers first hit, and they won't finish until 2060. That's what we're talking about, this huge population. So we're talking now in preparation, and we already have the president talking about to mandate vaccines, and healthcare workers across the nation are saying it's not worth it. 1, I don't want to be vaccinated. 2, I don't want to work in a setting that my chances of getting COVID is double or 3 times more than if I work in a factory. So we're in a real tough thing. And when we're trying to wrestle with all of this, and I'm trying to get the best guesstimates as I possibly can. And that's why I kind of stalled for a month, that next month we'll be back here, but we'll have full presentations. I have the architect, I have fancy drawings, I have estimates as to where we could build it, what property. By then I'll have the estimate of what it would cost to a demo our health center. I'll have estimates as to will the state is looking at the possibility of increasing per bed if you build new. Today it's only 79,000, and I'm still waiting for an estimate of what it's going to cost to build. And we're looking at guesstimating right now anywhere from 200 to 300,000 a bed, and we get reimbursed 79,600 or 800. So we're looking for all those pieces. It looks like that might change a little. We are no longer looking at an annual increase in T19 of 2%. I even have Whipley's estimating it's going to be maybe 4% or more. So we get 12 and 12, and that 12 is a little artificial because that 12% bump actually equates to about 10% because 2 of the percent has been tied into other types of reimbursement for the nursing home, but we're already getting that. So it's a little bit, it's about a real 10% increase. So we're struggling with all of that, and we're still back into the situation of asking, do we replace it? Do we renovate, or do we close?
Okay. Any questions from anyone? I know I stated prior to this meeting that, okay, I'll get you, Peter, and you, I'm sorry, I didn't see it, so go ahead.
Does it have my name on it? Thank you. I said something before, I've said it a few times already, but John Q. Public is not going to blow $35 million. He will not blow. I guarantee you that tomorrow. Another thing that I've been saying for the last bunch of times is, and Matt and I have talked about it, is there's a thing called foundations.com. There's a zillion foundations with millions and millions and millions of dollars. Chris and I talked last time, she said something about a 550 qualify, a number, we said there was some kind of number. Anyways, long story short, get on foundations.com. Don't stop at one. There's a whole billion of them. They got millions of dollars that they do in grants. And it's been there for years. I've been on other committees with land and water conservation stuff that we've gotten a bunch of money from them.
The state is opening up with the feds a possibility of grants. Now, we're not expecting $20 million, but it could end up with $1 million or $2 million.
All right, so, but there's a problem with there's a fly in the ointment of your calculation. So the issue isn't the 30 million or 25 million or
Right.
35 million, whatever the number to build the building, that's not the problem. Because while Matt's right, the reimbursement is only 79,000 per bed, where the cost is 200,000 per bed. We'll get that over time because we'll borrow it out and amortize it out. That is not the issue. And if I get a grant, whether it's ARPA money or whether it's money from foundations.com, or if Jesus drops it himself, it makes no difference, because what you're really doing is you're putting the grant in place of the reimbursement. You're not helping yourself on the actual operational cost. When we go to referendum, we're not asking people for 35 million. We're asking people for probably close to $500,000 to operate the stinking thing, so that we can actually afford to pay CNAs probably a very nice wage compared to where it is today. That's the real issue you're struggling with.
I was thinking basically of like 4 or 5 different foundations, putting it together. I mean, I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. I'm saying that addresses one really short-term
Okay.
problem. I'm talking about an operation. Basically, how do we pay people's wages for the next 30 years? That's going to be the issue. And oh, by the way, where are we going to get the people? They don't exist. If you look at the
Yeah.
data 10 years from now, they're gone. And we're not getting them to move back, which we'll talk about another day. But the point being, that's the real struggle you got isn't convincing people to spend $35 million on a nursing home. Yes, that's an issue. The real problem is, how do you keep the thing going?
Yeah.
And this county, for at least the last 15 years, has done a phenomenal job of taking care of the population that government ought to serve, and then funding it without paying property taxes. Because if somebody can explain to me why we use property taxes to fund people's lives, it makes no sense to me. Medicaid isn't doing what Medicaid was built to do in the 60s. And the federal government isn't solving the stinking problem, and then passing it through the state hasn't helped the issue either. That's the real issue. And we're asking county board supervisors and local property taxpayers to solve the problem that their state legislators and really federal legislators aren't solving.
All right, before I make some comments, are there any other questions from anyone? Okay. I know I've said this in the past that I believe, at least in the 8 years that I've been on the county board, this is probably the most serious decision that the county board will have made during that time. And there just is no easy answer to this. I'm still of the belief that it should go to referendum, because to make a decision about Samaritan is a huge burden to be placed on the minds and hearts of the 26 people who serve on the county board. And I think before we can make any type of decision, we need input from the people in this county. And I think this is one way that we can get it. Now, how that referendum would be worded is one thing that will need to be determined. But whatever it is, the other part of that is that we need to educate the public on what it will mean to vote yes or no on that referendum, so that they understand what it is they're voting on. And I know that won't be an easy task either, how to word such referendum. It's the word dilemma has been used a few times this afternoon. And if I remember correctly, the definition of a dilemma is there's just no answer, easy answer to a dilemma. A dilemma is something that can't be solved. And I'm not sure that whatever we come up with will really solve the problem. That's how I feel right now. But I know we've had a discussion, and I walked out of there very down, I guess you could say, because they're, I want things explained to me. I want information provided, and then I want to be able to take that and come to a decision. And I can't do that with this problem. That's the hard part.
Madam Chairwoman, can I
Yes.
just clarify one thing? The referendum question's an easy answer. It's just a horrible question, because the
you
way
mean-
that it's statutorily prescribed, it's very difficult to read. Basically, what we'd be asking people is for authority to increase the tax levy by, we'll just say $500,000 forever, which will have this amount of impact on your tax rate, which will affect your home by about this amount, and it will begin in this year.
And will
that-
that 500,000 be enough? You said forever. I mean, I would think it would go up after,
Unfortunately, that's not how referendums work.
oh,
Like I said, the language and the process is statutorily prescribed. And that's the crux of what I was trying to get at with Supervisor Sorcy's question is, you're really asking people to support this operation, not so much the brick and mortar. And I think it's what makes, to your point about the escalation of the cost, it's what makes this really hard. To add insult to injury, we think the first handful of years, we actually might not need a levy. The problem is you get past a certain point and we're almost certainly going to need a levy. So when do you start asking? I mean, I'm with you. I think at some point in time, this is something you have to put in the hands of the taxpayer. Because we're talking, if it is $500,000 and this is a 30-year building, you're talking a $15 million investment on a $30 million building. And that's not the other two pockets that they're pulling from, which is of course state Medicaid dollars and federal Medicaid dollars. So the referendum question is very simple. It's just extraordinarily confusing, and it doesn't really address the problem. It's just the best it's really the only Band-Aid we've got. Sorry.
So I'm just sighing.
Yes.
Yes, Peter.
So you get the money from the foundations, okay? And then we put the mines together and we get a way to subsidize what we need down the road. I mean, we don't have to pay it tomorrow. We can subsidize it down the road. But the key, get the cash, and then we think about how we're gonna do. This way it's helping us along. We don't have to do anything. That would be my suggestion. If I'm wrong, okay, but that's
So,
what I'm thinking.
so what you're saying works in one scenario. There's really only one scenario where what you're suggesting works, and that is when we get to the point that we need the operating cash, you talk about building an independent living facility to subsidize the rest of the operation. There's plenty of other places that do this.
Just like delaying your jail sentence, you just keep delaying until you get to the time you have to go.
As a millennial, I don't know if I'd use that phrase about baby boomers, but I understand what you're saying. But point being, I mean, basically, and then lots of other counties have done this. This isn't something that's brand new. It's not like a brilliant idea that's coming out of anybody here. It's just we have avoided that type of competition in the marketplace at like all costs. I think when Matt got here 8 years ago, the drawings were literally on the
drawing.
table to build independent living and do exactly what you're describing. We've avoided it at all costs, but that's certainly a possibility. If the board basically puts us down that path, just know that isn't who we've been. We've never, I shouldn't say never, we haven't in 20 years plus gone down that path. So I don't think it's in the character of who we have been. I personally don't think it's who we are, but which is why I tend to agree with the chairwoman that I think at some point this is the taxpayer's decision to make.
I'm a firm believer in no means not now. So. Okay, thanks.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time or not, but you spoke of, the bigger picture, the need to put pressure on the feds and state, because this is really a global issue, not just unique to us right here and now, and it's going to be long-term. How do we actually go about doing that? Can we, strategize on that? Because to a decrease in the long-term care beds, but yet the increased need, this is being pushed back on the acute care hospitals. That's my world I've always lived in. And these individuals stay and occupy a hospital bed at a crazy high rate. And that comes back to taxpayers. That comes back to, everyone and their insurance. So what can we strategize? Is that Health and Human Services? What can we do as a county and when, or,
Yeah, Matt can speak to this more with Leading Age and his experience in the association, national association that we're a part of. But just from a pragmatic perspective, this is why I started with, I'm not sure now is the time for us to try and tackle that. And the reason I say it is, I mean, we're literally in the days and hours of the same Congress talking about spending 3.5 trillion on God knows what. And then we're good. I mean, it's not just our legislators that the time isn't right. You also just heard about a budget being presented to you that's going to cut the tax levy by $500,000. So we're receiving $26 million in ARPA money. We're probably going to receive 5 to 10, you've heard this before, all of this. We're probably going to receive another 5 to 10 million in opioid settlement money. If the infrastructure bill passes, we're probably going to get another 5 to 10 million dollars. But now we got to come to you and ask you for $500,000. Now we can spin that, and I think we can give it a good explanation. But now we're going to go to legislators and say, you just spent 1.5 trillion on infrastructure. You just spent $3.5 trillion on a continuing resolution. You increased the debt ceiling, and we need more money for Medicaid. There's times and places to make arguments. I don't think we're in the time and space, unfortunately. And I think a referendum is going to be really hard. I think Supervisor Sorcy is 100% spot on. This is a really, really difficult dilemma.
It's not that I don't want, I want.
Understood. Yeah, as somebody coming from Germantown, and having come from Richfield myself, most of these people in that part of the county don't even know Samaritan exists. So it's a challenge. And I don't think whether it's a legislator at the state level, a legislature at the federal level, or even local people, I'm not sure the time is great. It's just really tough. You want to speak about Leading Age a little bit, what they're doing?
Well, Leading Age, there's an association here in Wisconsin. Well, they have leading ages across the nation. And there's a national, and they're very influential, but they can't do it alone because they face the politicians, and the politicians know it's tough. It's tough. And I question, why spend these trillions when this is a real problem that exists not for one state, not for the blue or the red states. It exists, period. And why not address that instead of just throwing money?
Get a good night's sleep tonight. We'll see. Yeah. All right, if there aren't any other questions or comments, we'll go on to our action items. And Sarah, if you wish to leave, you can do that at any time because I think we've got the board issue covered. Okay. All right, so the next item is adjusting compensation for Samaritan staff. Julie, are you going to talk to this?
I will, yes. As you know, with some changes, I don't actually know all the rules, but some changes in the way that we do things, when we make compensation changes, we don't necessarily need county board approval. That can happen at the administration level, but we do think that it's important to be transparent and to bring this forward for you to get a nod of approval or a nod of disapproval. But as we've been discussing, right, we're in a staffing crisis. And we want to make sure that for Samaritan, we are competitive with the market. And so the HR department and the payroll department and the budget office did a review of the compensation for surrounding counties and found that very quickly we had moved out of the 75th percentile for CNAs and RNs specifically. LPNs continue to be at a competitive rate. And so we are proposing to increase CNA's wage by 2.5% and RNs at 3.8%. And that would be effective October 1st.
Okay, any questions on this? All right, then I guess I would, oh, Pam.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I kind of wanted to mention this earlier too. We're in the budget. With the staffing concerns, and they're not going away. And have we looked at trying to make this higher? You know, have you explored or is even higher wages, or is that helping to keep with retention or retention bonuses, or what all thought came into, you know, the 2.5 and the 3.8 to help with retention?
Sure. So this is not the only strategy we're looking at, but this is one that we can do immediately. And so there's a couple of things that we're doing. One is we are looking at shifts for RNs. And so we are going to, be moving to 12-hour shifts. And that will help us with staffing and retention as well. And our nurses are on board with that. And there will be increased compensation with that. The way that those hours will be run, they'll be getting some regular overtime in the way that those 12-hour shifts run. And so that is one piece. We are reviewing it with CNAs, but that will come with a very very heavy cost. But we're also just looking at some general incentives across the board. One, to help retain staff during this very uncertain time of whether are we staying in the business, are we staying in the business, and can we give them an incentive to stay with us until we build or until we move our last resident, as well as some other types of incentives for working the harder to fill shifts like PM and weekends. And so those are all things that are in the works, but they're being developed. They need approval, and very likely then perhaps will come to this committee. I'm not sure. And so those, we are talking about those things, but this is something we can do immediately and be effective October 1st, because we know we're outside of the competitive market right now.
What about a higher increase? Would a higher increase with your research make it, help the retention more or to help the recruitment more? Or is there kind of a window that you've discovered that no, and we're within that window?
So we still need to be able to pay for it, right? So it still needs to fall within our budget. And so, the dollars that we're looking at, I'm guessing perhaps, I don't want to speak for the county executive or for their office, but, are perhaps coming from ARPA dollars for incentives. I'm not 100% sure at this point, but we still need to stay within budget. And also, money is only one of the answers. And the staff work in this field, and right, because their heart is in it, and they have a love for working with the elderly residents and the elderly population. They are we are seeing a staffing crisis like we've never seen before, because they are in a state of flux because of the vaccine mandate that they're worried about, and because of the uncertainty of their future. Taya and Matt and I have been talking with staff numerous times to make sure they're up to speed to every step, that we're taking and where we are. But human nature is human nature. If I'm worried about my job and I want to pay my bills, I'm going to go find a different job. And we know that there are tons of CNA positions, tons of RN positions out there. And so, we are trying to work on culture and offer them the support and the shifts and pay increases. But I'm not sure if people would stay, even if we give them $100,000, it's hard to say.
Is the budget reflective 22, 23 of this increase?
Yes.
Madam Chairwoman, might I
Yes.
also interject that that what you end up deciding as regard to the last discussion will impact everything that Director Driscoll was just talking about for incentive bonuses and all that kind of stuff. Because if the decision is to hold off till April to go through a referendum, all of that will need to happen. And then we truly are talking about general fund transfers and ARPA dollars and all kinds of stuff. So it is a little bit dependent on where that decision-making process goes, which is again part of why we wanted to make sure to have an update at this meeting and not drag our feet. Because as she was stating, like the retention crisis is a real thing. And again, it's not just our facility, it's all throughout healthcare. It's all throughout the country. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear that decision has not been made. We're waiting until what we know. When we have some certainty, then we can make decisions about what those bonuses look like and things like that.
I'm assuming that ARPA funds would go across the board, so they really don't help us because the next facility is going to get ARPA funds too. Or is that not true?
It would be true relative to county facilities. It will not be true necessarily
For
relative to
private?
nonprofit or private.
Okay.
The answer is it depends, but for us specifically, at the local government level, the amount of dollars we got was so massive that we have a built-in advantage, which we have other built-in advantages too, but it would not necessarily be apples
So
to
it's not
apples.
competitive. I mean, it's actually good competitive to us.
Yeah, it's in our favor, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Anything else? Pam?
Yeah, just a a comment or kind of a question. You know, what can we do to maybe, you know, that non-monetary retention aspect to help as, you know, Health and Human Service Committee members or as county supervisors, you know, to help morale and retention, you know, the work environment? Or is that something, you know, to think
Provide
about?
certainty. I'm serious.
Yeah,
Provide
okay.
certainty. That's why I tried to emphasize, this is not
Yeah.
a Samaritan issue exclusively. And yes, that we're adding another brick to the wall by saying, we don't know what the future looks like. That is above and beyond, but it is everybody, you know that better than anybody. But the sooner we can come up to a decision and tell people this is what's happening and this is when it's happening, the better. And we're all struggling with that, but that's a humongous, right, I would
Yeah, I
say.
would agree.
Okay. Then I would entertain a motion to approve the compensation adjustment for certified nursing assistants and registered nurses as presented. Peter, second. Lois, any other questions, comments? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, and that motion carries. And then our last item is a resolution regarding Youth Justice Innovation Grant.
Yes, so before you have a request to accept a grant in the amount of $150,000 that we were awarded from the Department of Children and Families. The grant is from October 1st through December 31st of 2022. So it's about 15 months. We will have an opportunity to receive additional sort of extension at half the grant in 2023. As we have discussed many times at this committee, one of our large driving forces of our budget is placement of children in residential care and out of home care. And we also know that that's also not a great option for children for good outcomes for them. But we're struggling with what else can we do when we have children who have behaviors that can't be managed at home and parents who don't want to manage those behaviors. So there is some programming that we'd like to implement. It's in-home evidence-based family therapy that we are going to be requiring families to participate in before we will entertain placing their child in a residential facility, unless of course there's a safety issue at hand. And so this is part of our strategic planning for how we're trying to reduce both the number of children who are going in out of home care and out of state care, as well as reduce the cost for the county. As Erin Dahl had described, we did budget a one therapist in the county budget that will be cost neutral because we'll be drawing down Medicaid dollars from CCS, as well as we'll be utilizing this grant to contract for 2 therapists with professional services group, with the plan that the cost of those therapists will become sustainable through reimbursement as well. So this is really some funding that we've received to do a startup project, something that we really think will have positive outcomes, not only for our families, but also for our ever increasing costs of out-of-home care.
Any questions? Then I would entertain a motion to accept the Youth Justice Innovation Grant and forward on to the full county board for approval. Lois, in a second, Pam. All right, any other comments or questions? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, and that motion carries. Our next meeting date is Wednesday, October 27th at 4:30